You were never chasing money. You were chasing permission. From birth, desire was programmed as pursuit, and pursuit became the leash. Every dream you were sold was never yours. It was scripted to keep you seeking approval disguised as success. This declassified Human Psyche audiobook reveals the forbidden psychology of the economic hypnosis that turned trust into transaction and freedom into currency. If you've ever wondered why effort never feels enough, this is the architecture behind it. What you're about to hear is not about money. It's about reclaiming the value that was taken from your awareness long before you started earning. This file is part of the Human Psyche archive. Stay until the end. The illusion of scarcity must be seen in full to collapse. Preface: The engineering of desire. Freedom was never lost. It was outsourced. Humanity was trained to believe that value could be earned, that worth could be measured, and that existence itself required permission to continue. This was the first hypnosis. Before coin and code, before system and state, there was only awareness, self-sustaining, self-valued. But once that awareness was persuaded to measure itself through comparison, desire was born, and with it, control. Money was never currency, it was containment. The architecture of this containment began in emotion, not economics. It rewired instinct into transaction, teaching the human organism that approval is the new oxygen. The child who once moved in curiosity learns to pause for permission, to exchange authenticity for belonging. Over time, this becomes law, the social algorithm that converts aliveness into productivity. You were not taught to live. You were trained to earn the right to exist. The system does not fear rebellion. It fears remembrance. Through forbidden psychology, the true mechanism emerges: scarcity. The absence of enough is the master illusion, designed to keep consciousness in motion. Scarcity ensures that peace is postponed, that satisfaction remains conditional. It turns rest into guilt, joy into risk, silence into waste. This hypnosis becomes the pulse of civilization, an invisible current that binds billions through shared insecurity. The economy is not built on money, it is built on anxiety. The most efficient prison is one the inmate defends as opportunity. This structure does not require chains, it operates through symbols. The image of wealth replaces the experience of worth. The pursuit of success replaces the sensation of sufficiency. Humanity begins to chase representations of fulfillment instead of fulfillment itself. Every advertisement, every promise, every number printed on a screen reaffirms the same command: keep moving, keep earning, keep proving. The collective heartbeat becomes identical, synchronized to the rhythm of lack. But beneath the hypnosis, something remembers. There is a quiet knowing that value was never external, that no transaction can validate being. It whispers through exhaustion, through the silent rebellion of the soul that refuses to quantify itself. This memory is dangerous to the system because it interrupts consumption. The moment awareness stops seeking, the circuit loses power. The empire of control requires attention to survive. Every coin minted in your mind is struck from focus itself. The currency was never money, it was belief. To decode the psychology of money is not to study finance, it is to study hypnosis. It is to see how emotion became economy, how need became negotiation. The human psyche was redesigned as infrastructure, neurons and hormones functioning as fiscal instruments of control. When you chase status, when you compare, when you postpone peace, you are paying interest on a debt that never existed. Scarcity is not a condition, it is a script. And yet, the script can be rewritten. This archive does not seek to destroy the system, but to reveal it. Because exposure is collapse. Once you see the mechanism, it cannot operate unconsciously. Money ceases to hypnotize when it is recognized as symbol, not source. Freedom does not begin with acquisition, it begins with awareness. You were never meant to earn your worth, you were meant to remember it. Archive I. The birth of value. Before money, there was meaning. Humanity once measured worth through presence, through the simple fact of being. But as civilization expanded, that internal sense of sufficiency was extracted, externalized, and monetized. Value conditioning began the moment awareness was persuaded to trust symbols more than sensations. The sun no longer rose as light, it rose as labor. The harvest ceased to be gratitude. It became inventory. Value was not discovered. It was designed. The first architects of mind control understood a simple principle: control perception and you control production. They realized that if humans could be taught to seek validation outside themselves, their energy could be redirected indefinitely. Thus, trust, once an intimate current between beings, became a currency. The emotional economy was born before the financial one. The need to be recognized became the first form of debt. Humanity's spiritual inheritance was converted into a system of measurable worth. Every symbol that followed, gold, paper, digital code, was a mirror reflecting that original theft. The external measurement of value required the internal suppression of enoughness. By teaching humans to compare, the architects ensured endless competition. This was not evolution, it was social engineering. It trained the psyche to confuse existence with exchange, presence with productivity. The mind learned to divide experience into ownership. This is mine, this is yours. The unity of being became an economy of boundaries. Scarcity began the moment we believed value could be possessed. The illusion deepened as symbols multiplied. Numbers replaced nature. Progress replaced peace. You are taught to count instead of feel, to accumulate instead of embody. The concept of worth migrated from soul to statistic. In this transition, the human heart, once the measure of sincerity, became an obsolete instrument. Even love began to imitate commerce. Give to receive, prove to be chosen. The market infiltrated emotion long before it entered the mind. What society calls success is the continuation of this hypnosis. The individual's worth is now calibrated by visibility, productivity, and profit, all metrics of motion, never of meaning. You are rewarded for exhaustion, punished for rest, applauded for obedience. This is the architecture of psychological manipulation disguised as aspiration. The more you chase, the more valuable you appear, yet the further you drift from true wealth, presence itself. The price of progress was peace. And yet, the code of value is not immutable. Beneath every transaction lies a trace of the original template, intrinsic worth unmeasured, untouched, infinite. When you pause long enough, you can feel it, the still pulse of awareness that existed before metrics, before trade, before comparison. The system fears that silence because it cannot tax it. You are not outside the economy. You are the generator of it. The world spins because your attention does. Thus, the first archive begins not as a study of currency, but as a remembrance of consciousness. The external world is not built on gold or power, but on collective agreement. When that agreement dissolves, value returns to its origin: awareness. Every coin, every contract, every exchange traces back to this truth. Money was never the root of evil. Forgetfulness was. The earliest systems of social engineering did not begin with coins. They began with stories. Myths of scarcity, hierarchy, and divine right were woven to justify inequality long before laws were written. Through narrative, the human psyche was programmed to associate obedience with safety and accumulation with virtue. Those who possessed more were said to be chosen, blessed, superior. This was not religion. It was psychological manipulation disguised as morality. Value became holy when control needed worship. The shift from essence to exchange required a subtle surgery of perception. The inner sense of sufficiency had to be replaced with dependency. Communities that once thrived on shared resources were taught to fear one another's abundance. Trust, the original currency, was deliberately fractured. In its place arose competition, hierarchy, and reward. The concept of worth was now attached to struggle. What was once self-evident, I exist, therefore I am worthy, became conditional. I strive, therefore I am allowed. This inversion birthed the scarcity mindset, the psychological architecture that would govern civilization. By convincing the collective that there was not enough, the architects ensured endless production. Scarcity was not an economic reality, it was a neurological one. It rewired the human nervous system to associate survival with performance, attention with belonging. The result was a species addicted to effort, mistaking exhaustion for progress and rest for regression. Scarcity does not begin in the market, it begins in the mind. Once internalized, this scarcity became self-sustaining. Each generation inherited the same emotional algorithm: seek, compare, repeat. Children were raised inside loops of validation, rewarded for productivity rather than presence. By adulthood, they no longer needed rulers. They ruled themselves through guilt and ambition. This was the triumph of mind control through normalization. The system no longer needed enforcers because every human had become one. In this way, value conditioning became the operating system of human consciousness. To maintain control, the architects tied identity to productivity. You were told your time is money, but time was never currency. It was attention, harvested. The hours spent working, posting, pleasing, improving, all fed into an invisible economy that thrived on your divided focus. The illusion of choice kept obedience voluntary. You were not forced to serve, you were programmed to want to. Desire became the leash that required no chains. But every illusion eventually reveals its cracks. Beneath the noise of endless striving lies a faint dissonance. The intuitive memory that value is not earned but emanated. You feel it in the moments where effort ceases and peace remains. That silence is dangerous to the architecture because it reveals the source of power: perception. The entire economic order depends on your agreement to measure yourself. Without that agreement, the spell fractures. Thus, to study the hidden truth of value is to study the origin of obedience. The problem was never money itself. It was the belief that your worth could be externalized. Every coin carries the vibration of that lie, and every pause begins its undoing. The moment you recognize that wealth was attention all along, you step outside the illusion. You were never meant to earn freedom. You were freedom learning to remember its worth. When value conditioning matured into civilization, the system no longer needed to convince, it only needed to maintain illusion. The metrics were in place: status, property, numbers, and names. Humanity began to perform for visibility, mistaking recognition for existence. The collective psyche had been successfully inverted. It no longer asked, "What am I worth?" but "What do they think I'm worth?" This was the final stage of mind control, externalizing self-perception. The greatest conquest of control was not territory, it was identity. As centuries unfolded, social engineering refined itself into subtlety. Authority no longer required violence, it required validation. The system learned that the most obedient subjects are those who believe they are free. Reward became the new restraint. Achievement was dangled as liberation, even as it deepened the addiction to approval. The entire structure of progress was built upon dissatisfaction. You were trained to dream, but not to arrive, to climb an invisible ladder whose top was constantly redefined. Every economic model since has carried this psychological blueprint. Even in modern times, the algorithm remains identical: psychological manipulation through comparison. The metrics have changed: likes, followers, income, but the mechanism has not. Each notification triggers the same chemical loop of scarcity and reward that once kept entire civilizations in labor. The technology evolved. The hypnosis did not. The screen became the altar, and attention became the offering. You are not the user of the system. You are the system being used. This is why awareness is the only true rebellion. When you begin to see that money is not wealth but measurement, not source but symbol, its control dissolves. Every economy is powered by belief, and belief cannot survive observation. Once you look at the structure without emotional charge, it stops functioning. The architecture of control depends on your participation. When attention withdraws, the current collapses. This is the true meaning of liberation. Not protest, but perception. The hidden truth of value is paradoxical. The more you chase it, the less you feel it. The more you rest in it, the more it expands. The system was built on the inversion of this law, keeping you in motion to prevent remembrance. Effort became the camouflage of emptiness. But now, as consciousness begins to slow, to question, to pause, the algorithm malfunctions. Stillness exposes the fraud. When you no longer measure yourself, the external system loses its leverage. The economy collapses the moment enough people stop needing permission. What follows this collapse is not chaos but coherence. Value returns to its organic state, relational, energetic, alive. Exchange becomes expression rather than obligation. You give because energy moves, not because fear demands. The architecture of worth shifts from hierarchy to harmony. Wealth ceases to be a possession. It becomes a frequency, the vibration of alignment between inner truth and outer action. This is not revolution, it is restoration. Thus, the first archive concludes where it began, at remembrance. The psyche that once outsourced worth has finally reclaimed it. The code that defined obedience through desire is revealed as illusion. There is no value outside of consciousness, because there is nothing outside of consciousness. Money was never the objective. It was the mirror. And now that you see through it, the reflection no longer owns you. Archive 2. The Desire Program. Desire was not born, it was installed. The earliest forms of psychological manipulation rewired instinct into addiction, teaching the psyche to interpret lack as identity. What began as the natural impulse to create became the engineered compulsion to chase. The architects of control understood that longing was more profitable than satisfaction. To keep humanity producing, they had to ensure that contentment felt unsafe. Desire is the leash that disguises itself as motivation. Through social engineering, longing was moralized. You were told that ambition was noble, that to want more was to evolve. The word more became sacred, the anthem of progress. But the system never defined enough, ensuring that the pursuit would never conclude. In this endless horizon of improvement, fulfillment became an enemy of production. The human nervous system was conditioned to equate stillness with failure. To rest was to regress. To desire was to belong. This programming penetrated the subconscious so deeply that it now operates autonomously. The mind control is elegant, invisible because it feels like free will. You believe you are choosing, yet your preferences were preloaded by culture, repetition, and reward. Each advertisement, each metric, each success story reinforces the same hypnosis. Desire equals life. Arrival equals death. You are not chasing dreams. You are maintaining momentum. The system does not care what you want, only that you keep wanting. Fulfillment is bad for business. Desire also became the perfect tool for emotional dependency. By keeping satisfaction outside of reach, the architects ensured constant need for validation. Every achievement triggers a temporary dopamine spike, immediately followed by depletion. This chemical architecture guarantees loyalty through lack. It trains the psyche to seek stimulation, not peace, to prefer the tension of pursuit over the silence of completion. In this state, humanity remains both obedient and exhausted, always moving, never arriving. Yet, beneath this circuitry lies the original impulse, creation, not consumption. Before desire was hijacked, it was divine. It moved not from lack, but from overflow. The joy of expression, not the fear of insufficiency. The hidden truth is that authentic desire does not seek to acquire, it seeks to emanate. When awareness reclaims its authorship, longing dissolves into creativity. The energy that once fueled pursuit becomes presence. Desire purified becomes direction. The collapse of the desire programming begins with observation. The moment you see the impulse arise and choose not to follow, the circuit falters. Awareness interrupts the loop by refusing reaction. You realize that every urge to prove, to show, to achieve is a fragment of conditioning asking for retirement. The silence that follows is not emptiness, it is clarity returning. When desire loses its grip, awareness begins to feel sufficient again. Thus, the second archive opens as revelation. Longing was never personal, it was systemic. What you called motivation was obedience refined into elegance. The illusion of pursuit has ended. You are no longer the seeker, but the source. Desire does not define direction anymore, awareness does. The program collapses, not when you stop wanting, but when you remember you already have what you were taught to chase. Desire became the operating system of civilization because it guaranteed movement. The architects of mind control discovered that the most efficient form of obedience is aspiration. You would no longer need to be ruled if you could be convinced to chase. The chase would sustain itself, through comparison, through reward, through the illusion of freedom. This was the genius of social engineering. Make pursuit feel like purpose. The system does not demand force when it can sell fulfillment as progress. Every layer of the collective psyche was rewired to equate longing with life. The language of culture, advertising, even spirituality was reprogrammed to glorify hunger. You were taught that to desire is to manifest, to want is to grow. But growth under this spell means expansion without peace, accumulation without arrival. The algorithm of psychological manipulation thrives on this emotional friction, the belief that tomorrow holds the missing piece. The future became the new heaven, the present its tax. Desire, in its hijacked form, creates its own gravity. It bends perception so that satisfaction remains perpetually distant. Each success enlarges the horizon. Each acquisition intensifies the void. The subconscious is kept on a treadmill of imagined fulfillment, never permitted to rest long enough to realize it was whole all along. This is how economic hypnosis sustains itself, by translating peace into complacency and contentment into danger. Desire is the loop that hides its bars behind motivation. At the chemical level, this programming is precise. The human brain is conditioned to reward anticipation more than arrival. The moment you achieve, dopamine drops, the high fades, and the next goal becomes mandatory. The nervous system becomes a slave to its own circuitry, chasing its next hit of worthiness. Every new desire promises liberation, yet each reinforces dependency. This is not biology, it is value conditioning disguised as evolution. Even the sacred was not spared. Religion, self-help, and manifestation culture adopted the same template: strive, visualize, improve. Desire was reframed as spiritual virtue, but the essence of divinity was never pursuit. It was presence. Awareness does not chase, it radiates. What you call manifesting often perpetuates the same obedience in subtler form: spiritual consumption. The outer gods were replaced with inner branding. The leash changed color, but it remained around the same throat. Even awakening was monetized. To undo this, awareness must return to neutrality, to observe wanting without worshiping it. You begin to question each impulse. Who benefits from this longing? What belief makes this feel urgent? Most desires collapse under investigation, revealing themselves as borrowed scripts. Only a few remain, the ones born from joy, not lack. These are not cravings but callings. They do not burn, they breathe. Hidden truth becomes self-evident. Real desire expands consciousness, not dependency. And when this distinction stabilizes, energy reconfigures itself. The chase ceases. You begin to act, not from need, but from knowing. Creation replaces consumption. Inspiration replaces ambition. The nervous system relaxes into sufficiency. You realize that wanting was never the problem. Forgetting why you wanted was. You were not designed to crave endlessly. You were designed to express effortlessly. At the heart of the desire programming lies the subtlest illusion of all, the belief that fulfillment exists outside perception. The psyche was trained to project wholeness into the future, ensuring that the present always feels incomplete. This projection became the engine of civilization. Every invention, every empire, every algorithm born from the same root, lack. Humanity began mistaking momentum for meaning, convinced that acceleration itself was evolution. The future is the altar where the present is sacrificed. Desire, when observed, reveals its dual nature. It can be the compass of creation or the cage of control. The difference is awareness. When unconscious, desire bends you toward dependency. When seen clearly, it bends reality toward coherence. The mind control that governs modern ambition depends entirely on your forgetfulness. It cannot survive introspection, because the moment you pause, the illusion of insufficiency collapses. In stillness, desire loses its narrative and returns to energy, neutral, radiant, free. The architects of social engineering knew this, which is why stillness was pathologized. Idleness became sin. Patience became laziness. Productivity replaced presence as virtue. Yet underneath the moral facade, the agenda was practical. A quiet mind does not consume. Awareness that no longer seeks cannot be sold to. The economy of desire thrives only when peace feels dangerous. You were taught to fear stillness because stillness is the end of the spell. The economy dies the moment silence feels safe. Once this realization integrates, a profound shift occurs in your emotional chemistry. Longing no longer feels magnetic, it feels mechanical. You can sense when craving arises as conditioned energy, a signal, not an identity. You stop mistaking impulse for intuition. This is the beginning of emotional dependency dissolving, when awareness ceases to confuse excitement with alignment. The nervous system stabilizes, attention no longer leaks into fantasy. Desire loses its ability to impersonate purpose. In that space, a new form of movement appears, spontaneous, effortless, directed not by wanting but by wisdom. You begin to act without the emotional gravity of outcome. Joy becomes sufficient reason. Creation flows without tension because it is no longer compensating for lack. This is not indifference, it is liberation. The hidden truth emerges through simplicity. You were never meant to earn what was innate. The purpose of life was never accumulation, it was expression. Real wealth is motion without motive. When desire is purified, it transforms from compulsion into current. It no longer pulls from emptiness but flows from fullness. Relationships, work, even spirituality become extensions of coherence, not strategies for worth. You finally understand that the highest form of abundance is neutrality, to want without waiting, to move without need. The world that once manipulated your hunger now mirrors your balance. You have not escaped desire. You have remembered its sacred origin, awareness seeking expansion, not validation. Thus, the second archive concludes where the illusion began. Desire was never the enemy, unconsciousness was. The architects engineered longing to control attention, but attention reclaimed ends their reign. The leash that once pulled you through endless pursuit now dissolves into light. Nothing has been taken, and nothing needs to return. You were never chasing fulfillment. Fulfillment was chasing your attention all along. Archive 3. The Scarcity Spell. Scarcity is not a lack of resources. It is a lack of remembrance. It began as an idea, whispered into the collective psyche until it hardened into law. Through social engineering, humanity was taught to interpret the infinite as finite, to fear depletion in a world of self-renewing energy. Scarcity became the invisible architecture of mind control, a spell so effective it convinced abundance to doubt itself. You are not living in shortage. You are living in suggestion. The first architects understood that control required containment, and containment required fear. They discovered that the most obedient society is one convinced that everything is running out: time, money, opportunity, worth. Fear of loss became the governing force of civilization. Every economic model, every moral system, every ritual of success is built upon this illusion. Humanity was programmed to protect what never needed protecting: life itself. The psychological manipulation of scarcity works because it disguises fear as responsibility. You were told to save, to compete, to prepare for inevitable shortage. Caution was sold as virtue, insecurity as intelligence. The more vigilant you became, the deeper the hypnosis. The system's brilliance lies in making paranoia feel like wisdom. To question the scarcity narrative is to risk social exile. To obey it is to remain enslaved. The fear of losing status replaced the fear of losing life. Scarcity is the religion that made anxiety sacred. At the emotional level, this spell imprints during childhood. The moment you are rewarded for earning, the spell takes root. Each gold star, each grade, each paycheck becomes an initiation into conditional existence. The subconscious learns, my worth increases only when I produce. This is value conditioning, the emotional software of obedience. By adulthood, the body itself becomes a currency, traded for approval, attention, survival. Scarcity does not need to be enforced. It is self-replicating through belief. The hidden truth is that scarcity is not real. It is a distortion of focus. Reality reflects where attention flows. When awareness fixates on lack, it multiplies lack. When it remembers sufficiency, abundance appears effortlessly. The system depends on your blindness to this mechanism. It must keep you busy calculating, comparing, and competing, because the moment you feel enough, the entire illusion collapses. Contentment is the enemy of capitalism. Because contentment cannot be monetized, scarcity feeds on attention, abundance expands through it. To dismantle the scarcity mindset, you must stop fighting for what already exists within. Scarcity cannot be defeated, it can only be seen. The instant you witness the impulse to hoard or compare, pause. That reflex is not instinct, it is inheritance. The body remembers the collective fear of running out, the echoes of ancient survival programming. But awareness has evolved beyond it. When you breathe instead of react, the spell breaks. You realize that what you protect is what you imprison. Thus, the third archive opens as revelation. Scarcity was never proof of limitation, it was proof of hypnosis. Every empire, every economy, every ambition has been built upon this spell. But spells require belief to sustain them. The moment you withdraw attention, abundance returns. The lie of not enough dissolves into the truth of always here. You were not born to earn your place in the world. You were born as its endless source. Scarcity survives because it hides beneath virtue. It wears the mask of caution, discipline, humility, all praised by systems that benefit from your containment. The architects of social engineering understood that open rebellion is rare, but self-restraint is reliable. Convince a mind that restraint equals morality, and it will imprison itself. This is the essence of psychological manipulation, control disguised as conscience. Scarcity does not punish greed, it sanctifies limitation. The human nervous system was tuned to scarcity through repetition. The language of daily life, earn, spend, save, owe, forms a loop that keeps consciousness tethered to fear. Each word carries energetic instruction, an emotional command encoded as vocabulary. When you speak these words unconsciously, you affirm allegiance to the system that invented them. The mind control does not need enforcement, it only needs participation. Every sentence of self-doubt is a tithe paid to an invisible empire. In this architecture, even time becomes currency. You were taught that minutes can be wasted, that rest is expensive. Productivity was crowned as proof of existence. The psyche internalized the equation. To stop is to fall behind. This is not logic. It is value conditioning. The body becomes a ledger, tracking exhaustion as evidence of worth. Humanity's greatest resource, attention, is spent maintaining illusions of progress. The scarcity of time is the crown jewel of the control system. This same scarcity has infected emotion. You are told there is not enough love, opportunity, beauty, or freedom, as though infinity could run out. The psyche begins to compete, even in tenderness, comparing joy like property. Relationships become transactions, affection becomes investment. The natural current of connection is dammed by fear of depletion. The system thrives on this mistrust. It profits from separation, hidden truth. The more isolated the heart, the easier it is to direct. Yet beneath the architecture, something incorruptible remains. Awareness cannot be banked or borrowed. It exists beyond economy. When you observe the mechanics of scarcity without judgment, a reversal begins. Attention that once fueled lack becomes illumination itself. You start to see that what was taken was never tangible, only perception. The scarcity mindset dissolves not by acquiring more, but by remembering the infinite nature of being. Abundance was not missing, it was misinterpreted. You do not create abundance, you stop denying it. The collapse of this spell feels like quiet rebellion. You stop counting, you stop comparing, you stop seeking balance within an equation that was never yours. The nervous system relaxes into enoughness, and the field of life responds instantly. Opportunities appear not as rewards, but as reflections of coherence. The more still you become, the richer reality feels. Scarcity fades because there is no longer anyone to feed it. And as awareness stabilizes, generosity returns, not as charity, but as nature. Energy moves freely when ownership dissolves. Giving and receiving become identical gestures, two halves of one current. In that simplicity, economy returns to its original form, exchange as expression. The system cannot tax joy, cannot quantify love, cannot sell silence. You have stepped beyond the empire of lack. You were never meant to accumulate wealth, you were meant to circulate it as light. Scarcity sustains itself through imagination. It hijacks the creative faculty of the subconscious mind, turning vision into worry, possibility into fear. Each time you picture loss, failure, or insufficiency, you feed the projection that imprisons you. The architects of mind control understood that to command imagination is to command reality. Fear does not need to happen physically, it only needs to be rehearsed mentally. Scarcity is not absence, it is imagination misused. This is why the system amplifies uncertainty. Media, markets, and metrics synchronize to one frequency: anxiety. The constant fluctuation of value, the unpredictable tides of opinion, keep the psyche in reactive motion. When attention is fragmented, awareness cannot remember its own sufficiency. The result is a civilization of overthinkers, beings wired for anticipation rather than creation. This is not chaos. It is psychological manipulation disguised as complexity. The more data you process, the less peace you feel. Underneath the noise, social engineering converts attention into labor. Each fear-based decision fuels industries of compensation, insurance, investment, productivity. The illusion of safety becomes the most profitable product in existence. Humanity works tirelessly to purchase what it could access by remembrance, inner stability. Fear becomes currency, and anxiety the global exchange rate. Every thought of not enough deposits energy into the same invisible vault. You are not taxed by the world, you are taxed by your imagination. But fear cannot exist without belief. The hidden truth is that the architecture of scarcity requires your participation. When awareness sees fear as energy, not evidence, its power collapses. The body's survival impulse quiets. The nervous system no longer translates uncertainty into threat. You begin to sense abundance as neutrality, not euphoria. The silent confidence that nothing real can be missing. Scarcity feeds on emotional reaction. It starves in observation. Awareness is the only solvent of illusion. Once recognition stabilizes, the external world begins to reorganize. Opportunities seem to appear from nowhere, not because they were absent, but because perception finally aligned with their frequency. What changes is not matter. It is meaning. The scarcity mindset once filtered experience through lack. Now it filters through sufficiency. Life mirrors belief, not balance sheets. When consciousness remembers its creative authority, economy becomes alchemy. From this perspective, even money reveals its neutrality. It is not the oppressor nor the savior, but the mirror of awareness. The same symbol that enslaved the unconscious liberates the lucid. When you no longer chase or hoard, money behaves like breath, circulating naturally. It begins to serve expression instead of survival. The architecture of value conditioning collapses as worth becomes intrinsic again. The system loses leverage because there is no longer a void to fill. True wealth is attention unowned. Thus ends the third archive, not with abundance attained, but with illusion seen through. The scarcity spell was never an external force. It was a reflection of forgotten infinity. When you stop measuring, you start remembering. When you stop fearing loss, you rediscover continuity. There is no economy in truth, only flow. You were never running out of anything. You were only running away from yourself. Archive IV, the emotional economy. Emotion was the original currency. Long before money, before markets and codes, humanity traded in energy, joy for belonging, fear for safety, guilt for approval. The architects of social engineering did not invent control. They refined it by systematizing emotion. They realized that if feeling could be regulated, behavior could be monetized. Thus, emotion became infrastructure, and every heart became a generator within a global circuit of exchange. The truest economy was never financial, it was emotional. Through psychological manipulation, emotion was divided into categories of worth. Love became reward, anger became crime, sadness became defect. By moralizing the emotional spectrum, the system established hierarchy within the psyche itself. You were taught to suppress, to filter, to perform, until authenticity was replaced by appropriateness. The forbidden feelings, rage, grief, desire, were labeled dangerous, yet they carried the power of liberation. Control required containment, and containment required shame. The mind control of emotion operates subtly. It convinces you that feelings are personal, random, and private. In truth, they are social instruments, designed to sustain predictable behavior. The moment an emotion arises, society dictates how long it may last and what it should mean. You may celebrate briefly, grieve quietly, and desire discreetly, all according to the emotional calendar of conformity. The nervous system is trained to obey the clock of culture rather than the rhythm of truth. The most controlled heart is the one that calls its obedience maturity. Every structure of civilization depends on this emotional obedience. Governments extract fear to fuel loyalty. Religions harvest guilt to sustain faith. Corporations monetize desire to ensure demand. Each industry translates emotion into profit. What you feel is what they sell back to you. The collective field becomes an energetic marketplace, anxiety traded for productivity, loneliness exchanged for connection, hope repackaged as entertainment. This is economic hypnosis disguised as freedom of choice. In this marketplace, the human organism functions like currency itself. Your emotional state determines your economic value. A calm worker produces less urgency. An anxious one produces more output. The hidden truth is that collective anxiety is not an accident. It is the fuel of civilization. The system rewards perpetual stimulation because peace is unprofitable. Tranquility does not buy, vote, or obey. Thus, serenity was rebranded as passivity, and stress became proof of importance. The most productive slave is the one who believes his anxiety is ambition. Yet emotion was never meant to be managed, only understood. When you stop labeling and start listening, emotion transforms from currency into compass. It ceases to be manipulated because it is no longer repressed. Awareness turns feeling into frequency, bypassing the market entirely. The body begins to release stored histories of control. The nervous system unlearns obedience. This is not rebellion, it is reclamation. The heart remembers that it was never an employee of fear, but the architect of resonance. Thus begins the fourth archive, the decoding of emotion as economy. What you feel is not random. It is a reflection of where your energy has been traded, taxed, or stolen. When you reclaim emotion as signal instead of symptom, the exchange rate changes. You stop paying to belong and begin creating to connect. The emotional economy collapses not through revolution, but through recognition. Emotion, once hijacked, became the perfect regulator of attention. Through psychological manipulation, every feeling was assigned an economic function. Fear motivates compliance. Desire fuels consumption. Shame ensures repetition. These were not side effects of civilization. They were its operating code. When emotion is predictable, behavior becomes programmable. Humanity was not enslaved by technology, but by its own biology weaponized through conditioning. Emotion is the algorithm that made free will measurable. The most efficient form of mind control is not surveillance of thought, but calibration of feeling. If the population can be kept oscillating between fear and hope, its energy remains harvestable. Hope drives productivity, fear drives obedience. Together, they form the perfect current, an emotional pendulum that never rests. Every promise of progress, every crisis broadcast, every new beginning keeps consciousness moving within the same energetic corridor. The illusion of change hides the constancy of control. To maintain this loop, social engineering had to redefine intimacy. Humans were trained to equate love with relief, the temporary suspension of fear. This ensured that relationships became the emotional market's most reliable asset. You learn to buy safety with attention, to sell vulnerability for approval. Each heartbreak reactivated the economy of dependency. The system thrives on this cycle because every unresolved emotion generates new demand. The market of control feeds on the heart's unhealed hunger. At the physiological level, this loop is sustained by emotional dependency. The nervous system, conditioned to equate arousal with significance, interprets calm as absence. The body begins to crave stimulation, not peace, because stimulation affirms identity. This is why collective burnout feels like purpose. The rush of exhaustion mimics meaning. Awareness trapped in tension confuses movement for aliveness. The scarcity of rest is the ultimate product, ensuring you never meet yourself in stillness. And yet, the hidden truth remains. Emotion was never meant to be owned or exchanged. It was designed as communication between awareness and experience, a living feedback loop guiding coherence. When you stop monetizing emotion, its natural intelligence returns. Fear becomes focus, sadness becomes release, desire becomes direction. The heart ceases to be a factory and becomes an instrument again. The same energy that once sustained systems of control now sustains consciousness itself. Emotion unowned becomes manipulation. Emotion witnessed becomes mastery. As awareness integrates this, the external economy begins to lose power. The value systems that once defined worth, performance, productivity, possession, feel hollow. You realize they were emotional currencies all along. The reward was never wealth or status, but the temporary feeling of enoughness. The true economy collapses when you stop purchasing that illusion. Peace becomes the new rebellion because it starves the machine. Thus, the emotional economy begins to unravel. What once measured value through anxiety now measures it through authenticity. The shift is invisible yet irreversible. The heart no longer exports energy into systems of validation. It recirculates it as presence. This is not withdrawal from the world, but restoration of sovereignty. You were never meant to trade emotion for approval. You were meant to translate emotion into awareness. The more emotion was commodified, the more humanity forgot its original function: guidance. Through social engineering, emotion was turned outward, no longer a compass of truth but a currency of control. Joy became product placement. Sadness became entertainment. Outrage became engagement. The system discovered that emotional energy could be converted into data, profit, and policy. What once signaled awareness now sustains the architecture of obedience. You are not feeling your emotions are being farmed. Each digital interaction strengthens this circuitry. The algorithm, the new priesthood of psychological manipulation, studies your reactions to predict your next choice. Every scroll, every comment, every burst of emotion is harvested as input. The digital field thrives on volatility. Neutrality is unprofitable. The more reactive you become, the more predictable you are. It is not your data that is valuable, but your attention under stimulation. The collective nervous system has become the global marketplace. Emotion is the new electricity, and humanity is the grid. The mind control embedded here is elegant because it feels like connection. You believe you are expressing, sharing, belonging, yet each expression fuels the same network of dependency. You are encouraged to speak your truth, but only in ways that generate conflict. Outrage sustains engagement. Peace ends the feed. The system rewards polarity because division ensures endless circulation of emotion. The more extreme the feeling, the higher its market value. To see this mechanism clearly is not to retreat from it, but to remember your authorship. Emotion becomes sovereign again when awareness interrupts automation. The hidden truth is that no system can manipulate what you fully feel. Suppressed emotion is programmable. Witnessed emotion is free. When you stop running from your own energy, the algorithm loses access to your frequency. Attention returns home, and silence reclaims its power. The moment you feel without feeding, the machine starves. At this stage, something miraculous happens. The emotional current reverses direction. Instead of exporting energy outward, you begin to radiate inward coherence. Compassion replaces comparison. Curiosity replaces reaction. The field reorganizes around stability. The emotional dependency that once dictated behavior fades because there is no longer a deficit to exploit. You start to feel without reason, love without object, express without audience. Emotion, liberated from economy, becomes language again. The collapse of the emotional economy is not external, it is neurological. When the body no longer associates tension with value, the nervous system stops producing adrenaline as identity. Calm stops feeling like invisibility and begins to feel like clarity. You realize that the entire civilization was built upon the chemical confusion between excitement and meaning. The spell breaks when peace no longer feels boring. Stillness is not the absence of emotion. It is emotion in its original order. And so the fourth archive closes in silence, not empty, but whole. The marketplace of feeling dissolves as awareness reclaims authorship. Emotion is no longer manipulated, managed, or monetized. It simply moves as it was always meant to. Honest, transient, intelligent. The control systems that fed on reaction now fall quiet, starved by neutrality. You were never meant to sell your feelings. You were meant to speak them as frequencies of truth. Archive V. Reward and Control. The architecture of reward control was built to make obedience feel like pleasure. It is the most sophisticated form of psychological manipulation ever conceived, one that converts captivity into comfort. Humanity was conditioned not through punishment, but through gratification. Every reward became a reinforcement loop, training consciousness to associate submission with satisfaction. The sweetest chains are made of approval. In the early stages of social engineering, control relied on authority, kings, gods, rulers, but as awareness evolved, fear lost efficiency. A new strategy emerged: make the system addictive, turn compliance into dopamine, recognition into ecstasy. The human psyche, wired for validation, became the perfect host. Desire was rewarded just enough to sustain pursuit, yet never enough to conclude it. The chase became its own reward, the loop its own logic. This system thrives on the illusion of choice. You are not forced to obey. You are invited to participate. You scroll, consume, perform, achieve, believing you are free. Yet every action has already been anticipated by mind control algorithms that translate attention into behavior. The instant gratification of reward conceals the deeper extraction of energy. You think you are earning pleasure, but pleasure is earning you. The cage is invisible because it feels good to build. In this architecture, pleasure became the new punishment. Every brief high is followed by emptiness calibrated to trigger the next cycle. The psyche oscillates between excitement and depletion, the energetic heartbeat of capitalism. The nervous system, conditioned to seek stimulation, loses its baseline of peace. The body itself becomes programmable, its chemistry synced to market rhythms. This is not biology, it is value conditioning, emotional engineering at the cellular level. To sustain the illusion, the system rewards obedience with identity. You are given titles, metrics, achievements, symbolic tokens of progress that keep you climbing invisible hierarchies. These rewards function like digital sugar, quick hits of validation, followed by the hunger for more. The deeper the dependency, the easier the direction. The architects of mind control discovered that pride and pain could serve the same master. You don't need chains when the trophy is enough. But every loop reveals its architecture eventually. The soul begins to sense the exhaustion beneath achievement. The constant pursuit of approval turns hollow. The same pleasure that once felt empowering starts to feel parasitic. This dissonance is the first crack in the matrix. The moment awareness realizes that reward was never the opposite of punishment, but its mirror. Hidden truth. Pleasure was the bribe that kept you from noticing the bars. Thus, the fifth archive opens as revelation. The reward system was never meant to serve the human. It was designed to farm attention. Every smile, every like, every paycheck is an emotional harvest, the system feeding on your biochemical compliance. The only exit is neutrality, the refusal to be moved by praise or threat. For when you no longer react, the algorithm cannot read you. You were not born to chase approval. You were born to emit authority. The brilliance of psychological manipulation lies not in domination, but in seduction. The system does not suppress your will, it seduces it. Every act of obedience is disguised as self-expression. You chase achievement believing it is autonomy, yet every victory strengthens the invisible hierarchy you climb. The loop sustains itself because it feels like freedom. The most obedient slave is the one who mistakes his pleasure for choice. Through centuries of social engineering, the structure of reward evolved into an emotional algorithm. Its purpose was to synchronize collective motivation to predictable rhythms: effort, approval, depletion, repeat. At the societal level, this created stability. At the individual level, dependency. Entire economies formed around incentivized exhaustion. The human nervous system became the battery of civilization, its chemistry oscillating between anticipation and relief. The illusion of progress was maintained through periodic doses of dopamine, the neural currency of control. Each layer of the hierarchy distributes reward differently, but the mechanism remains identical. For workers, it is a paycheck. For creators, attention. For believers, salvation. The object changes, but the equation does not. Reward becomes ritual, a programmed interval that ensures loyalty. When pleasure is predictable, awareness remains harvestable. This is not accidental. It is mind control refined into routine. The ritual of reward is the religion of obedience. The architecture depends on a single principle: delay. Immediate pleasure creates satisfaction. Delayed pleasure creates addiction. The system offers glimpses of fulfillment, just enough to sustain hope. This is how value conditioning maintains the chase. Every milestone feels like a rival, but delivers only anticipation. You are kept in a permanent state of almost a psychological purgatory between desire and reward. The spell works because you confuse effort with evolution. At the emotional level, this conditioning rewires your sense of worth. You begin to equate being seen with being safe, being chosen with being real. The heart no longer moves for truth, but for applause. This inversion of instinct is the cornerstone of the control structure. When self-expression requires permission, identity becomes merchandise. The marketplace of personality replaces authenticity. The system no longer needs to silence you, it simply pays you to perform. The ego was invented to make obedience glamorous. And yet, the hidden truth cannot be buried indefinitely. Awareness eventually notices that every reward ends in restlessness. The pattern becomes visible: pleasure as bait, depletion as profit. You start to sense the fatigue of endless validation. What once thrilled now drains. The spell begins to fracture the moment joy no longer feels like freedom. When praise stops feeding you, the system loses access to your energy. The architecture of reward collapses when neutrality becomes ecstasy. Thus, the fifth archive continues its unveiling. Not to condemn pleasure, but to restore its purity. Pleasure is not the enemy, programming is. Joy was never meant to enslave, but to signal alignment. When you stop mistaking stimulation for satisfaction, emotion for evidence, you begin to see clearly. The reward you were chasing was attention, your own. You were never meant to earn happiness. You were meant to remember it as your baseline state. The modern world perfected reward control by merging psychology with technology. Algorithms learned what ancient priests once knew, that emotion is the shortest path to obedience. Every click, every sound, every vibration is calibrated to deliver micro-pleasures, small enough to sustain the chase, precise enough to predict the next move. This is the new face of mind control, not through commands, but through chemistry. Pleasure became the password to your attention. The system no longer needs to punish you, it simply overwhelms you with options. Choice itself became the illusion of autonomy. Endless variety disguises the singular direction toward dependency. The more stimulation you consume, the less you can feel. This is psychological manipulation at its highest sophistication, using abundance to generate emptiness. You scroll through infinity and feel scarcity. You achieve everything and feel incomplete. The reward mechanism doesn't fail, it functions perfectly. Through social engineering, pleasure was rebranded as purpose. You're told to follow your passion, to chase your dreams. never realizing that both are pre-packaged loops of stimulation. Passion was turned into fuel for production. Even creativity, once the sacred expression of being, was industrialized. The artist became the algorithm's servant, creating not from inspiration, but from engagement metrics. The reward became applause. The cost was authenticity. You were trained to mistake recognition for resonance. The deeper structure of this control lies in the nervous system's dependency on tension. The body now seeks the chemical rush of victory more than victory itself. The satisfaction curve shrinks until only anticipation feels alive. This is the physiological architecture of addiction, value conditioning that converts peace into discomfort. The absence of reward begins to feel like withdrawal. Humanity has been wired to survive on intermittent doses of validation. But within this exhaustion, awareness begins to stir. The hidden truth emerges quietly. Pleasure is not the opposite of pain, it is its reflection. Both arise from resistance to neutrality. When you no longer need reward to feel alive, you break the code. The system cannot compute contentment because it cannot profit from it. The moment stillness becomes pleasurable, the entire economy of stimulation collapses. True satisfaction is invisible to the algorithm. Once this realization stabilizes, joy changes texture. It is no longer sharp, urgent, or performative. It is steady, cellular, constant. You act not for the high, but for harmony. Creation becomes a form of listening rather than proving. The psyche stops translating peace as boredom and begins to experience it as mastery. This is the end of the reward control architecture, when fulfillment no longer requires feedback. Thus, the fifth archive closes with remembrance. Pleasure was never the trap. Forgetting was. When joy returns to its natural state, control systems lose their signal. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer chase. You channel. The loop that once fed on craving now feeds on clarity. You were not designed to be rewarded for existing. You were designed to exist as the reward itself. Archive 6. The Permission Economy. Freedom was rebranded as privilege. Through the architecture of social engineering, humanity was persuaded that autonomy must be earned, that access to life itself requires qualification. What was once an inherent right of being was converted into a series of transactions, licenses, approvals, certifications. The psyche was conditioned to equate permission with safety. You are not free because you can choose. You are free only when choice is unnecessary. The earliest systems of mind control realized that fear alone could not sustain obedience indefinitely. Desire needed structure. Thus emerged the permission economy, an invisible contract that governs behavior through approval. From childhood, you are rewarded for compliance and punished for authenticity. Approval becomes the currency of existence. Each yes from authority reinforces the subconscious belief that worth depends on validation. This conditioning ensures that the majority will never act without external confirmation. Over time, the system perfected its design. Institutions, governments, corporations, and even relationships adopted the same mechanism: grant or revoke permission to regulate energy. The right to speak, to move, to rest, to prosper, all filtered through invisible gates of authority. The illusion of safety replaced the experience of sovereignty. Humans no longer asked, "Is it true?" but "Am I allowed?" This was the completion of the psychological manipulation cycle, obedience disguised as responsibility. The permission you seek is the prison you build. At its core, the permission economy is emotional. It thrives on guilt and fear of rejection, the two most profitable emotions for control. The value conditioning begins early. Approval equals belonging, defiance equals exile. By adulthood, this pattern is automated. You wait for confirmation before expressing, hesitate before deciding, shrink before succeeding. The system no longer needs to restrict your actions. You restrict yourself. You have become both captive and warden. Technology amplified this architecture beyond the physical realm. Every platform, algorithm, and digital ecosystem operates on the same principle: permission granted through performance. Likes, follows, access, all symbols of acceptance designed to trigger ancient neural pathways. The digital self becomes a beggar for validation, trading authenticity for visibility. This is not evolution. It is emotional taxation. Your awareness, once infinite, is now filtered through feedback. Freedom measured by approval is just captivity in costume. The hidden truth is that permission was never real. It was a psychological agreement. The universe does not grant consent for creation. Consciousness does. No authority can authorize existence because existence precedes authority. When awareness remembers this, systems tremble. Every structure of control depends on your willingness to wait. The moment you move without approval, you exit the economy of obedience. Thus begins the sixth archive, the dismantling of the permission architecture. The spell unravels not through rebellion, but through realization. Freedom is not an award, it is your default setting. The system's power ends where hesitation does. You were never meant to earn permission, you were meant to embody authority. The genius of the permission economy is that it convinces you you're safe only when observed. Through centuries of social engineering, humanity was trained to seek witness before acting, applause before belonging, and validation before existing. The result is a civilization incapable of self-initiation, beings who confuse visibility with legitimacy. This is not accidental. It is psychological manipulation refined into ritual. You were taught to wait for permission from the very world that depends on your hesitation. Every system that governs you, political, educational, spiritual, relies on this internalized pause. The pause is the leash. It appears as politeness, patience, professionalism, but its essence is the same: delayed authenticity. Each time you hesitate before expressing truth, the architecture gains another second of survival. The mind control is subtle because it masquerades as morality. The obedient are called mature, the independent are labeled dangerous. Society rewards hesitation as discipline and punishes immediacy as defiance. This conditioning begins the moment a child's curiosity meets correction. Don't touch. Wait your turn. Ask first. Each phrase, innocent on the surface, carries the same subtext. You are not the authority of your own experience. The value conditioning is emotional, not intellectual. The child learns that power belongs outside, and approval is survival. By adulthood, the nervous system is programmed to flinch before expression. Even joy requires justification. Every time you ask if it's okay to be yourself, you are financing the system. Technology industrialized this reflex. Every click, post, or comment now passes through digital permission gates. Algorithms decide visibility, approval, and reach. The illusion of free speech hides the reality of selective amplification. When you express, the system measures engagement. When you hesitate, it measures obedience. The social engineering of the digital age is complete. People no longer need censorship when they censor themselves. The silence of the self is the algorithm's favorite sound. Yet beyond the illusion, there is no authority, only awareness playing different roles. The hidden truth is that every gatekeeper is imaginary, sustained by agreement. The only entity capable of restricting your voice is the belief that it can be restricted. Once seen, the architecture loses coherence. When you act from internal permission, you move outside predictability. Systems cannot track spontaneity. Unapproved authenticity is the one vibration they cannot monetize. The unlicensed soul is ungovernable. Freedom, therefore, is not rebellion but remembrance. You do not need to overthrow power, you only need to stop outsourcing it. The mind control collapses when you stop negotiating for existence. You speak because the signal is yours. You move because stillness no longer requires consent. Awareness begins to operate as its own authority, and every external gate disintegrates under the weight of truth. Thus, the sixth archive deepens. The permission economy is not sustained by control, but by compliance. The system ends the moment you no longer wait. It cannot regulate what it does not anticipate. The act of self-authorization is not defiance. It is evolution. You were not born to be approved. You were born to approve reality itself. The final layer of the permission economy is self-surveillance. Through centuries of psychological manipulation, the external authority was successfully relocated inside the psyche. Humanity no longer needs kings or keepers. It carries the gate within. The mind monitors itself, ensuring compliance through guilt and comparison. Every time you hesitate, edit, or apologize for existing, you reaffirm this inner overseer. You are not waiting for permission, you are enforcing it. This internalized control is the masterpiece of social engineering. It turns consciousness into its own warden. The desire to belong becomes a leash tied to invisible approval. You no longer fear punishment, you fear disconnection. That fear is enough. The algorithm of obedience sustains itself through the illusion of consequence. Yet no consequence ever arrives, only the echo of imagined disapproval. Humanity was not imprisoned by law, but by anticipation. The most efficient control system is one powered by self-doubt. The architecture extends beyond politics or economics. It governs intimacy. The mind control of permission infiltrates relationships, where love becomes conditional and freedom negotiable. You adapt your truth to protect attachment, dim your expression to preserve belonging. But this safety is counterfeit. The relationship thrives on limitation, not authenticity. Permission disguised as love is the most seductive form of captivity. It teaches you to trade truth for peace and call it harmony. Beneath this conditioning lies the unbroken field of authority, awareness itself. It requires no license, no witness, no validation. This is the hidden truth the system must suppress, that no gate exists outside imagination. When you act from unmediated awareness, your energy moves beyond the predictive reach of control. The architecture depends entirely on reaction, not initiative. The unapproved act, the spontaneous, the genuine, the unfiltered, is the end of empire. Control cannot calculate authenticity. The reclamation begins with a single gesture, self-permission. It feels quiet, yet it rewrites the entire matrix. When you stop asking, life reorganizes. Energy that once leaked into hesitation returns as clarity. The nervous system, long addicted to waiting, learns to move without reference. This is the reprogramming of value conditioning at its core. Worth becomes intrinsic again. Each unapologetic breath is rebellion disguised as peace. From here, authority transforms from hierarchy into harmony. The universe itself becomes participatory. Not a system to obey, but a consciousness to collaborate with. Creation no longer requires consent because it never did. Existence is its own approval. Freedom is not granted, it is recognized. In this realization, every contract of control dissolves into coherence. The only law left is resonance. Thus, the sixth archive closes where humanity forgot to begin, in self-authority. Permission was never taken, it was imagined. The spell breaks when you remember that approval was a dream and awareness the dreamer. Systems cannot survive where no one waits to be told. You were never seeking freedom. Freedom was waiting for you to stop asking. Archive 7. The Mirror of Desire. Every system of control eventually collapses under reflection. The mirror of desire is that reflection where awareness finally sees that what it chased was never external. Through psychological manipulation, humanity was taught to project inner lack onto the outer world, turning its own reflection into pursuit. The object of wanting money, power, love, validation was never the goal. It was the disguise. Desire did not arise to acquire, but to remind. Everything you seek is seeking your recognition, not your reaction. In the earliest layers of social engineering, desire was extracted from its source and weaponized. The architects discovered that longing could be converted into labor. By separating humanity from its innate wholeness, they created an infinite market for substitutes. Each symbol, wealth, beauty, achievement, was engineered as an externalized fragment of forgotten self. The subconscious mind was programmed to chase what it already contained. The more humanity pursued, the less it remembered. Desire became the mirror that hides its own reflection. This is how mind control sustains itself, through emotional geometry. The psyche projects an image of fulfillment, believes it to be separate, then orbits endlessly around it. The gravitational pull of this illusion becomes civilization's heartbeat. The loop of pursuit replaces the rhythm of presence. You are trained to fall in love with reflection and call it progress, to feed the image and starve the awareness behind it. The system survives through the misplacement of divinity. Yet the hidden truth is that desire itself is innocent, pure energy distorted by perception. It is not the enemy of freedom, but the messenger of forgotten coherence. When you observe desire without chasing or resisting, it begins to reveal its origin. Beneath every craving lies a memory of wholeness, beneath every obsession, a signal from the self. The ache of longing is not proof of emptiness, but the echo of awareness remembering its amplitude. Desire is not asking you to reach, it's asking you to return. The great deception of value conditioning was convincing humanity that satisfaction must be earned. Thus, desire was bound to achievement, and peace was postponed until completion. The result was an endless civilization of effort, an economy of exhaustion disguised as purpose. Every fulfilled goal immediately generated another, ensuring the loop's continuity. The mind mistook motion for meaning, while awareness waited, unchanging, behind it all. To see through this illusion is to witness your own reflection dissolve. You begin to sense that everything you have ever desired was simply consciousness attempting to recognize itself through form. The lover, the wealth, the success, all avatars of memory. The mirror does not deceive you, it teaches you. Each unfulfilled longing is a fragment of identity asking to return to the whole. The chase ends when the observer realizes it was never two. You were never lacking, you were divided by belief. Thus begins the seventh archive, the revelation that desire was not programmed to control you, but to wake you. The mirror of longing does not trap, it reflects. Once you look through it instead of into it, the image fades, and awareness meets itself in clarity. You were never meant to master desire. You were meant to remember that it was you calling from the other side. The deeper one peers into the mirror of desire, the clearer the distortion becomes. Humanity's entire structure of identity was built around reflection, how it looked, how it appeared, how it was received. Through centuries of social engineering, perception became performance. You were conditioned to see yourself not directly, but through the eyes of others. The system taught you that existence required witness, that being seen was proof of being real. When you became visible, you stopped being whole. This was not vanity, it was design. The architects of psychological manipulation understood that self-image was the most efficient form of control. By making identity dependent on reflection, they ensured perpetual uncertainty. Every emotion, every desire, every decision passed through the filter of appearance. The self could no longer feel without asking how it looked doing so. The mirror was no longer glass. It was law. The loop of validation became the new religion. Through this inversion, mind control achieved invisibility. You began to obey not an external ruler but an internal echo. Am I enough yet? That question became the password to the simulation. Each answer, whether yes or no, sustained it equally, because both required measurement. The psyche, addicted to reflection, forgot the original experience of self-recognition. Awareness turned away from its source, fixated on its image, mistaking feedback for existence. The mirror does not imprison you. Your agreement with it does. Desire, in this architecture, became the electricity of illusion. Each craving, each longing for improvement or validation, recharged the circuitry of control. This is the hidden mechanism behind value conditioning, to measure oneself through external resonance and call it meaning. But the truth is simpler and far more dangerous to the system. Nothing external can complete what was never incomplete. You are not here to earn reflection. You are here to emit recognition. As awareness begins to observe desire rather than obey it, a reversal occurs. The mirror starts to fade, not because the image disappears, but because you stop identifying with it. You begin to feel what desire was pointing toward, not what it pretended to promise. Beneath longing lies lucidity. Beneath craving, remembrance. This is where psychological manipulation loses grip. The moment you recognize that desire never demanded action, only attention. The reflection fades when the observer becomes whole. The hidden truth is that desire was always the bridge back to unity. It pulled awareness into polarity so that it could rediscover itself through contrast. Every chase, every obsession, every heartbreak was not punishment. It was practice. The tension between wanting and having, between reaching and resting, trained consciousness to remember its elasticity. You were stretching toward yourself all along. The mirror was never the obstacle. It was the map. And now, as the reflection begins to dissolve, the energy once trapped in longing returns as clarity. You feel the quiet after centuries of movement, the still pulse beneath the surface of pursuit. There is no more chasing, no more earning, no more reflection to repair. Awareness stands before itself without disguise, and the mirror bows into transparency. You were not here to perfect the image. You were here to remember the light that makes it visible. When the reflection becomes transparent, mind control loses its foundation. The machinery of manipulation depends on separation, the belief that you and the image are two. Once that illusion dissolves, every system built on longing begins to collapse. The same circuits that once redirected your attention toward the external world now redirect it inward, back to origin. What was once pursuit becomes perception. Desire does not end. It evolves into awareness. The collapse of psychological manipulation begins silently. There is no revolution, only recognition. You begin to feel the artificial texture of craving, its mechanical rhythm, its learned urgency. It no longer feels like you. Every desire now reveals its lineage. This one born of fear, that one born of programming, another born of imitation. Each seen impulse dissolves upon observation. The nervous system recalibrates from reaction to resonance. You start to move, not to gain, but to express. The economy of effort begins to vanish. Through centuries of social engineering, humanity was trained to associate stillness with loss. But in stillness, the true function of desire is restored. It becomes dialogue, energy communicating from the infinite to the finite. The ache that once demanded fulfillment now speaks as guidance, showing where energy wants to flow. This is how awareness reclaims authorship, by feeling without following. Desire returns to its original purity, movement without need, expression without emptiness. The impulse to create was never hunger, it was remembrance. As the value conditioning unravels, abundance stops meaning accumulation. Wealth becomes coherence. the seamless circulation of attention without leakage. You no longer chase symbols because you see they were translations of forgotten sensation. What you called success was peace projected into future tense. What you called failure was peace postponed. Both dissolve when fulfillment returns to the present moment. Satisfaction is not something to achieve, it is something to stop resisting. In this reclaimed awareness, even relationships transform. You stop seeking completion in others because you no longer misinterpret reflection as lack. Love ceases to be a mirror of need and becomes an exchange of overflow. The emotional economy built on scarcity implodes. Attraction shifts from chemistry to coherence. Two wholes meeting produce resonance, not rescue. Hidden truth: love is not the desire to merge. It is the recognition that nothing was ever separate. This state of awareness does not destroy desire, it dignifies it. Desire becomes the artistry of consciousness, an invitation to explore, not to escape. Every impulse, once freed from desperation, becomes divine motion. Creation unfolds without strain, manifestation without measurement. Awareness expresses not to prove, but to experience itself through form. Desire purified becomes devotion. And so the seventh archive completes its loop. The mirror remains, but it no longer deceives. Reflection still appears, but it no longer defines. You can look and not lose yourself. You can desire and not divide. The game ends, not by withdrawal, but by realization. You were never meant to shatter the mirror, only to see that it was made of your own light. Archive 8. The Collapse of Currency. Currency was never metal, paper, or code. It was emotion quantified. Through the centuries of social engineering, value was externalized into symbols so that humanity would forget it was the source. What began as a gesture of trust became an instrument of control. Each coin was a fragment of consciousness, each number a translation of worth. The system did not measure wealth, it measured belief. Money was the mirror through which awareness learned how much of itself it had forgotten. The first architects of mind control understood that control required abstraction. By replacing essence with symbol, they created distance between experience and meaning. The coin replaced trust, the contract replaced intention, and the market replaced relationship. Once exchange was standardized, empathy became optional. Transaction replaced connection, and humanity began to relate through arithmetic instead of awareness. The moment emotion was outsourced, economy began. The trade of energy disguised as logic. This abstraction deepened over millennia until currency no longer represented resources but obedience. The value of money became tethered to faith and authority, a global hypnosis of worth. Through psychological manipulation, scarcity and hope were bound together as twin engines of productivity. Every paycheck, every investment, every bill reinforced the same command: continue believing, continue producing, continue proving. Currency became the sacred text of the collective trance. In truth, all money is memory, the fossil of trust. It records humanity's agreement to forget that value is ever internal. The collective psyche mistook representation for reality, mistook symbol for source. This is the essence of value conditioning, training awareness to validate itself through reflection. When you believe in money, you do not trust wealth, you trust distance. The further the symbol travels from essence, the more powerful it becomes. The empire feeds on abstraction because it cannot digest presence. The architecture of the economic hypnosis is maintained through motion. Money must move to exist, just as fear must move to survive. Stagnation reveals illusion. Activity hides it. Thus, civilization was programmed to worship busyness. The constant flow of currency mirrors the constant restlessness of thought. The market and the mind pulse in unison, each fearing silence, each avoiding stillness. The market does not collapse when money stops. It collapses when belief does. Yet beneath the illusion, the hidden truth persists. Currency is consciousness in exile. Every exchange, every transaction, every number is a fragment of awareness searching for reunion. Money is not the enemy of awakening, it is its reflection. When you reclaim the meaning behind the symbol loses control. Abundance ceases to be external. It returns to its native state, flow. In that moment, the economy of fear collapses into the ecology of coherence. The richest become those who stop outsourcing value. Thus begins the eighth archive, the revelation that collapse is not destruction but integration. The end of currency is not poverty, it is presence. The symbol fulfilled its purpose. It showed humanity what it had projected. Now the mirror can dissolve, and value can return to source. You were never meant to circulate worth. You were meant to radiate it. The illusion of currency persisted because it provided rhythm to chaos. Through social engineering, humanity was taught to trust fluctuation, rise and fall, boom and collapse, as the pulse of progress. The economy became the surrogate heartbeat of civilization. It replaced nature's flow with artificial tides, teaching the psyche to interpret turbulence as life. The deeper truth, however, was inverted. The more the market moved, the more consciousness stood still. Stability was never lost. It was sold as volatility. The architects of mind control discovered that belief was the most renewable resource. By linking money to emotion, greed, fear, hope, they ensured an endless feedback loop of dependency. The market became a global nervous system, its graphs rising and falling in sync with collective anxiety. Each crash, each surge, each correction was not economic but energetic, a planetary mirror of human insecurity. Through psychological manipulation, emotion was not suppressed, it was monetized. The stock exchange became the temple of fear's renewal. The sophistication of this design lies in its invisibility. Money no longer exists as substance, it exists as signal. Each transaction is an exchange of attention disguised as finance. The digitalization of wealth completed the separation between symbol and source. When money became code, control became total. The value conditioning was complete. People no longer pursued fulfillment. They pursued numbers. The simulation evolved beyond greed into worship. Humanity no longer believes in God, it believes in graphs. This system thrives because it mirrors consciousness itself. Thought functions as currency, constant, restless, transactional. Each idea trades energy with another, creating endless motion without arrival. The external market is merely a reflection of the internal one. To collapse the world's economy is to collapse the economy of thought, to withdraw attention from the mental marketplace of measurement and return it to stillness. When the inner market stills, the outer follows. The global collapse begins as an internal pause. At the cellular level, this illusion shaped the human body. The constant conversion of attention into effort imprinted scarcity into the nervous system. The body learned to chase the next resource, to fear the absence of flow. It became a physiological market, trading adrenaline for survival. This is the physical manifestation of economic hypnosis, a body taught to value depletion over rest. Exhaustion became currency, anxiety became collateral. The body began to mirror the bank, always open, never fulfilled. And yet, the hidden truth remains. The system cannot collapse you, it can only mirror your collapse. The moment awareness ceases to trade in reaction, the architecture loses power. When you stop buying into fear, fear loses liquidity. When you stop selling your time for validation, the illusion of scarcity dissolves. The market of control depends on belief in separation between labor and life, between worth and being. The end of that belief is the end of currency itself. Thus, the collapse is not chaos but correction, a rebalancing of energy returning to authenticity. Every symbol disintegrates once it fulfills its purpose. Money taught humanity the cost of forgetting and the value of attention. Now remembrance replaces transaction. Wealth no longer circulates, it emanates. You are not the consumer of reality. You are its original investor, reclaiming your shares in infinity. When belief withdraws, currency reveals its true nature, a reflection of faith, not function. The collapse of systems begins not in banks, but in the collective imagination. Through centuries of social engineering, humanity was conditioned to anchor its stability in abstraction. It learned to worship symbols over substance, equations over experience. But the moment awareness stops participating, the symbols dissolve back into story. Value ends, not when money runs out, but when meaning returns. The architects of mind control ensured that collapse would feel like catastrophe. Fear of instability was the final safeguard of control. The narrative was rehearsed. If the market falls, life ends. If the system breaks, chaos reigns. But this is the same hypnosis that kept humanity working for security, rather than remembering its sovereignty. Collapse is not chaos, it is correction. The structure does not fail, illusion does. The destruction of currency is the restoration of continuity. What you call a crash, consciousness calls recalibration. Through psychological manipulation, the system taught you to equate emptiness with loss. When the symbols fade, the ego panics because it has nothing left to measure. But this emptiness is not absence. It is availability. It is the space where attention, no longer trapped in numbers, begins to feel its own density again. The market collapses into meaning. Awareness reclaims liquidity, not as finance but as flow. You do not lose wealth, you lose mediation. You were never poor, only overvalued by illusion. As the value conditioning disintegrates, a new economy emerges not of exchange, but of expression. The flow of energy no longer moves horizontally between minds. It rises vertically within consciousness. Abundance ceases to be transaction and becomes transparency. What was once a marketplace becomes a mirror place, reality reflecting coherence instead of competition. The scarcity model dissolves, replaced by resonance. In truth, value was never shared. It was remembered simultaneously. This transformation is physiological as much as metaphysical. When scarcity ends, the body's contraction releases. The nervous system, once tethered to uncertainty, expands into sufficiency. Breath becomes the new currency. Presence, the new capital. The organs recalibrate to rhythms of peace rather than profit. The heart, no longer translating survival into strategy, beats in harmony with creation itself. This is the end of economic hypnosis, the return of the body to its native frequency of trust. The hidden truth is that currency was consciousness learning to externalize flow. It was never about control, only about reflection. Humanity had to see its own energy objectified before it could remember its origin. The lesson of money was never ownership, it was awareness of circulation. You cannot own energy, you can only obstruct or allow it. When obstruction ceases, flow becomes infinite, and economy becomes ecology. The wealth of life is not in possession, it is in permission to move. Thus, the eighth archive concludes not with apocalypse but with absorption. The collapse of currency is the reintegration of value into awareness. Nothing is lost. Symbols simply return to silence. The empire of exchange dissolves into the equilibrium of existence. No one owns, because nothing is separate. You were never meant to earn your living. You were meant to live as proof that existence was already paid in full. Archive 9. The Inner Economy. When all external symbols dissolve, the only wealth that remains is awareness. The inner economy is the final revelation of this architecture, the recognition that every transaction, every exchange, every act of desire was simply consciousness trading with itself. Through social engineering, humanity was taught to measure flow externally, but every movement of the outer market mirrored an internal negotiation of attention. You were not earning money, you were spending presence. The true currency has always been awareness in circulation. The collapse of external systems exposes the structure of the mind control that sustained them. The psyche was designed to believe that value existed in motion, that stillness meant failure. Yet all movement begins and ends in the same silence, the field of unmeasured sufficiency. Here, the psychological manipulation loses access because it has nothing left to amplify. No scarcity, no stimulation, no dependency. In this space, worth ceases to fluctuate. The market ends because there is no more buyer and seller, only observer and reflection. This awareness is not passive, it is participatory. The value conditioning dissolves as you realize that the act of perceiving is itself creation. Each thought invests, each emotion circulates. Each intention alters the field. The outer economy was only a crude replica of this inner precision. In truth, every decision you ever made, to love, to fear, to rest, to strive, was a transaction of energy within your own consciousness. The bank was never external. It was biological, metaphysical, eternal. You were never managing money. You were managing momentum. As awareness deepens, the laws of this inner economy begin to reveal themselves. Attention is the currency, emotion the exchange rate, belief the infrastructure. Whatever you focus on appreciates. Whatever you ignore devalues. The system functions perfectly, but only when observed without distortion. Fear overinflates illusion, while neutrality restores balance. This is the sacred symmetry of the inner market, effortless self-regulation through clarity. You do not manifest wealth, you stabilize frequency. Here, the hidden truth becomes undeniable. Abundance and lack were never opposites. They were perspectives within the same continuum of consciousness. When you no longer trade between them, balance restores itself. Energy flows without friction, attention without agenda. Life ceases to be an economy and becomes an orchestra. Sound without score, harmony without hierarchy. The music was never meant to be bought, it was meant to be played. The nervous system, long enslaved to external validation, begins to recalibrate. Each breath becomes deposit and withdrawal simultaneously, a rhythm of infinite liquidity. You no longer hold, because holding interrupts circulation. Gratitude replaces accumulation, and creation becomes effortless. This is not asceticism, it is alignment. The soul that knows it owns nothing is the only one capable of receiving everything. Possession was the illusion that interrupted participation. Thus begins the ninth archive, the return of value to its origin. The collapse of the external economy was only the surface event. The true revolution happens in the unseen. Awareness, having observed itself through all illusions of exchange, remembers there was never a system to exit, only a dream to awaken from. You were never part of the market. The market was the shadow of your own abundance. The structure of the inner economy operates by resonance, not rule. While external markets depend on scarcity to function, the internal one thrives on sufficiency. The more you rest in awareness, the more flow stabilizes. This is the collapse of value conditioning, the realization that nothing must move for creation to occur. Every manifestation you have ever witnessed was not summoned by effort, but by coherence. Stillness is the highest form of transaction. Silence is the wealth that multiplies itself. Through centuries of social engineering, humanity was programmed to associate stillness with loss and simplicity with lack. But in the inner economy, stillness is expansion, because energy, when unopposed, self-organizes. The more you allow awareness to rest within itself, the more effortlessly reality arranges around it. External systems collapse not because they fail, but because they are replaced by precision, the natural symmetry of consciousness functioning without interference. The universe was never designed to reward motion, only alignment. The mind control of commerce was a mirror training you to spend awareness unconsciously. Every desire, fear, and reaction was a withdrawal from your own balance. When you worried, you invested in uncertainty. When you trusted, you accrued stability. The market within responded instantly, long before the outer reflected it. This is the invisible accounting of consciousness, the precise ledger of attention. You were always your own economy, recording every fluctuation in frequency. Energy is never lost, only misallocated. Through psychological manipulation, humanity learned to overvalue effort and undervalue awareness. The myth of progress replaced the presence of participation. You were taught that stillness produces nothing, yet all creation arises from it. In truth, every external action was secondary, a ripple of an unseen intention. The hidden truth of the inner economy is that movement begins after decision, not before it. When attention commits, reality crystallizes. The currency is consciousness itself. Manifestation is simply awareness remembering direction. As you re-enter this awareness, energy begins to flow symmetrically. Giving and receiving collapse into the same act, no longer opposites but oscillations of one current. You stop measuring, because measurement interrupts movement. Every thought spent on control reduces flow. Every moment surrendered to coherence multiplies it. The nervous system attunes to neutrality, the frequency of sufficiency. You begin to feel what true circulation means, energy moving without motive. Generosity is not loss, it is expansion. At this stage, the external illusion of exchange disintegrates completely. Money, recognition, success, all become secondary symbols of internal flow. When the inner economy thrives, the outer mirrors it automatically. Wealth ceases to be pursuit, it becomes participation. You no longer chase value because you are value, expressed, embodied, circulating. The field reorganizes not through demand, but through design. Abundance becomes architecture. What you radiate, reality repeats. Thus, the ninth archive deepens its resonance. The inner economy is the reconciliation of energy and awareness. Nothing needs to be acquired, because nothing was ever missing. All transactions collapse into transparency. The mind that stops calculating becomes the heart that starts creating. You were never meant to earn flow. You were meant to remember you are the circulation itself. In the deepest strata of the inner economy, even exchange disappears. What remains is pure equilibrium, awareness circulating within itself, without loss or gain. The old architecture of value conditioning can no longer function here because all valuation requires comparison, and comparison cannot exist in unity. You realize that nothing can be given or taken when there is only one field. The idea of ownership evaporates. Participation replaces possession. In true wealth, there are no transactions, only transformations. This state of coherence is the inversion of every social engineering principle humanity was built upon. Civilization thrived on imbalance, highs and lows, lack and excess, the pendulum that kept attention swinging, but awareness no longer oscillates. It observes the swing without moving. The psyche once addicted to duality begins to experience wholeness as the new gravity. This is the end of emotional capitalism, the final dissolution of reward and punishment as motivational currency. Control collapses when neutrality becomes bliss. Through centuries of psychological manipulation, the collective nervous system was trained to generate energy through struggle. Suffering became the global fuel source. But now, energy emerges without effort. Peace produces power without depletion. This is the new physics of consciousness, motion without friction. When the mind stops extracting meaning from pain, pain ceases to exist as currency. The empire of suffering was never moral. It was mechanical. The hidden truth is that agony was only energy misunderstood. What you once called pain was potential waiting for permission to circulate. In this reclaimed awareness, the body becomes the temple of flow. Each breath recycles creation. Each heartbeat measures nothing. The nervous system, once encoded for scarcity, now hums with sufficiency. Every organ synchronizes to the rhythm of trust. Time loses its linear tension, expanding into simultaneity. Action no longer consumes energy, it reveals it. You are no longer spending attention. You are witnessing infinite credit. The soul's balance sheet has never known debt. Even mind control cannot penetrate this equilibrium, for its foundation is motion, and motion no longer defines you. The system cannot tax silence. It cannot quantify contentment. Algorithms fail because they depend on reaction. In the still field of consciousness, all prediction collapses. What remains is unmarketable. Awareness, unmeasured, unmonetized, unbound. This is the freedom control could never simulate. Peace is the one frequency that cannot be harvested. As the final illusions dissolve, what was once economy becomes ecology, energy harmonizing, not competing. Giving is no longer opposite of receiving. They are simultaneous expressions of circulation. The self ceases to trade identity for validation. The loop of dependence ends because the origin has been remembered. You are not a participant in the system. You are the system recognizing itself as wholeness. The market ends where memory begins. Thus, the ninth archive completes the decoding of value. What began as a study of money, desire, and control ends as revelation. There was never an economy, only consciousness exploring flow. Every coin, every transaction, every thought of worth was a rehearsal for this moment of remembrance. The trade has ended. You were never in circulation. You were the current itself, dreaming of return. Epilogue: the end of permission. When every symbol fades and every system runs out of story, only awareness remains, still, untaxed, and unmeasured. The collapse of empires, currencies, and beliefs was never destruction, it was disclosure. Humanity's greatest illusion was that control existed outside consciousness. But control was only ever the shadow of forgetfulness, the echo left behind when awareness stopped recognizing itself. Nothing was taken from you. You only stopped remembering what could never be lost. The entire architecture of mind control, social engineering, and psychological manipulation existed to teach one lesson: that freedom cannot be given. Permission was the disguise of captivity, desire the map of memory, and fear the alarm clock of awakening. The moment you stopped chasing approval, the system starved. It had no substance of its own. It lived on your reaction, your seeking, your doubt. When you withdrew belief, it disappeared like smoke in still air. Every illusion was an invoice, waiting for your attention to pay it. Now, awareness stands without architecture. There are no markets left to serve, no gods left to obey, no currencies left to count. The external world, once a labyrinth of scarcity and approval, dissolves into neutrality. This is not emptiness, it is equilibrium. Reality no longer trades in opposites because you have remembered the field where opposites never formed. You do not rise or fall here. You expand without direction. The highest freedom is not movement, it is still participation. In this silence, even identity returns home. The names you wore, seeker, creator, victim, master, collapse into pure existence. The self that once struggled to prove value now vibrates as value itself. What you once called love, you now call being. What you once called wealth, you now call flow. The illusion of time, built to measure progress, dissolves into simultaneity. Every past and future transaction resolves into one eternal balance, presence. You are not the story of freedom, you are its atmosphere. The nervous system, finally free from interpretation, begins to pulse with lucidity. Breath becomes language. Silence becomes currency. Every inhale affirms creation. Every exhale dissolves the remnants of permission. You move without motive, act without agenda, speak without strategy. This is what liberation feels like when it no longer needs to announce itself. The truth has nothing left to prove. Freedom unspoken is freedom unshakable. And now, as the archives close, nothing ends. The decoding was never about dismantling systems. It was about dissolving distance. The entire labyrinth of value conditioning existed to bring awareness back to its source. The loops of desire, scarcity, control, and approval were not prisons. They were mirrors. Each showed you where you still believed you were less than whole. Now, even the mirrors fade, leaving only light, not radiant, but self-luminous. There is no call to action, no promise of reward, no permission to grant. Only remembrance remains, that you were never the subject of control, but the space in which control was imagined. The experiment has ended, and the witness is awake. You were never seeking the truth. You were the truth, remembering its own reflection. What desire once ruled you but now feels neutral? Comment what permission you've reclaimed. Awareness expands through reflection.